So this week on I Got You podcast, I'm joined by Adria Thompson, a speech-language pathologist, TEDx speaker, and also the founder of Be Like Care Consulting. So I'm going to just have you, Adria, just tell us a little bit about yourself and some of the things that you do, especially dealing with dementia as well.
Yeah. Thanks. Thanks for having me. So my name's Adria. I am a speech therapist, and speech language pathologists are the same thing. And that's a question I get asked a lot. So just so you know.
Really?
So I've been a speech therapist for 10 years, and I've been working in long-term care communities. So places like nursing homes, memory care, assisted living. And that's really where I got my start learning, of course, about geriatrics,
Uh-huh.
but specifically, I started noticing that a lot of the people I worked with had dementia as well. And so, about 4 years ago, I started Be Light Care Consulting, which is where I just really specialize in dementia education and practical advice for how to care for people with dementia.
Okay.
And that was just a culmination of learning so much from working with hundreds of people with dementia in long-term care communities over my career. And then also I have a grandmother living with dementia. So I started seeing like personally and professionally how little resources were out there, how much families were struggling to understand what dementia is and how to support someone with it. And eventually it's kind of led to where I am now, where I talk about it all the time. I
Yeah.
have over 500 videos. And I also am a lecturer at Eastern Kentucky University teaching future speech language pathologists about aphasia and dementia.
Aphasia. Sorry. Can you help me with
Yeah.
that? What's
So
aphasia?
aphasia, good question. Aphasia is a language disorder. So it's basically someone who has difficulty with reading, writing, speaking, or understanding, or any combination, like one or several of those,
Okay.
after some kind of neurological event. So the
Mm.
most common reason for aphasia is a stroke. So
Oh,
you've probably heard of someone who's had a stroke and then afterwards had difficulty
yeah.
speaking, for example. That would be aphasia. But aphasia can also be caused by traumatic brain injuries and dementia.
Wow. Okay. So first question, I know dementia, Darling explained to me that Alzheimer's and dementia, it's not the same thing. Alzheimer's is did I get it right? Alzheimer is what it is, but dementia is some of the symptoms that comes with Alzheimer's, right?
hmm Yeah. That's a huge, like, confusing part of terminology because they are used kind of interchangeably, it seems, a lot of
Right.
times.
I do it.
So,
Yeah.
yeah, dementia is like an overarching term that refers to two things. And this is the two criteria that is most helpful for me to remember. So, dementia means that you have had a change in your ability to think. A lot of times that includes memory loss, right? Like,
Mhm.
that's the biggest changes we see in thinking for a lot of people. But that can also be changes in their ability to like think of the words they want to say. So it can affect language, it can affect problem solving and reasoning and planning ahead and organizing your thoughts. So it's all of those changes in thinking. So that's one component. But then the other component of the definition of dementia is that those
Mm.
changes in thinking affect a person's ability to care for themselves. So
Okay.
it's affecting their ability to like hold down a job, to get dressed, to make a meal for themselves. And
Okay.
so if someone has a change in their ability to think and it's affecting their everyday life and their ability to care for themselves, then they have dementia. But
Um,
dementia is caused by a million different reasons. There's over 100 different reasons that those two things can happen, that dementia can be present. And the most common diagnosis is Alzheimer's disease. It
okay.
accounts for 60 to 80% of all cases of dementia. And so that's the one that we're typically most familiar with and that we hear about the most.
Okay. Because a lot of the symptoms that you say right now, like in your 40s and 50s, you start forgetting words. You're talking
Mhm.
to someone and you're like, oh my God, what is that word? You can't remember these things.
Mm,
The ADHD kicks in. So much stuff is going on. So a
yeah.
lot of people probably start questioning, is this going to happen to me? Is this what's happening now at 40,
Yeah.
50? Could that
Mm,
be a starter?
yeah. It could be. Research tells us that changes in the brain happen up to 20 years before we start actually seeing real symptoms that we're concerned about.
Really?
So it is in midlife that our brain health is really, really important.
Yeah.
And so we don't want to wait until we're 80, 90 years old to do good things for our brain. We want to start that as early as possible.
Right. Right.
Um, but there are changes in our thinking abilities that happen as we age. We call those normal age associated memory impairments. And it's exactly what you described, where you walk into a room and you're like, well, what did I come in here for? Or, you're in a conversation and you're like, oh, like, what's his name? Oh my gosh,
Right.
I know it. It's on the tip of my tongue.
Right.
And the definition that kind of like uh, tells you what is normal that
Mhm.
feels like that versus what we need to be concerned about is really if you are the only one concerned. So if you're noticing changes in yourself, you're noticing that your attention span isn't as good as it used to, or your
Mhm.
memory is not as good as it used to, but anybody else that you ask in your life, they're like, honey, you're just stressed. Like you've
Okay.
got a lot going on. I haven't noticed anything. Like you're good,
Okay.
then by definition that's normal,
It's
right?
old age. Okay, got it.
Yeah, but it's when other people are starting to say, "What is wrong with her?" Like she is
Okay.
I,
Okay.
when it starts to be visible to other people and it's like it's obvious,
Okay.
that's where we start being concerned. And that's, when we start seeing it in other people, that's when we're start to be like, "Oh,
Oh, speech pathologist, how do you explain what's going on in the person's brain that's someone going through dementia? Can you explain that?
yeah, yeah. This is like one of my favorite things to teach because I think a lot of times we will see symptoms in a person like forgetfulness and it's easy to get jumped to being so frustrated. Like you just asked me that 5 minutes ago.
Yeah.
But if we start understanding it on a neurological level, it allows us to be a little bit more empathetic because we have the perspective of like, oh, that's something that's happening physically in your brain that you can't help. So, there are, like I said, many different diagnoses,
Mhm.
causes for dementia, and they all have a different process in the brain. So, for example, Alzheimer's disease is caused by something we call amyloid plaques and tangles. There's
Okay.
a type of dementia called Lewy body dementia that are caused by Lewy body proteins in the brain. There are also things like there are many other things that can cause disruptions in the brain. But if we were to kind of generally describe what's happening, it's
Mhm.
that there are processes that there are proteins, molecules, things that are happening in the brain that cause it to not function as quickly or as efficiently. And so parts of the brain can actually like die. It can atrophy, which is like shrinking, and like the tissues begin to not function anymore. And we see this with aging, right? Like we know that if there, as you get older, your strength generally is not as functional as it was in your past, right? You see
Mhm.
it in other parts of your body, your arms and your legs, your core, and the same thing can happen in the brain. And so when messages are not firing and they're not going to the different parts of the brain that are so necessary for us to operate as a normal human being, then
Mhm.
we start to see symptoms of dementia, slowness in thinking, forgetfulness, even personality changes.
Yeah.
All of that can be tied back to parts of the brain that aren't working as well as they used to.
Can something be done at an earlier age to prevent that? One of the things I was reading some reviews and people are saying if you're healthy, if you do certain things, you keep moving, you keep reading, that your brain won't get dementia. But then I
Yeah.
read under the reviews, somebody commented, my mom was an actress. My mom did this. She read, she exercised, she ate healthy, and she still had it at 70. So how
Yeah.
do you explain that? Can you do something to help it, prevent it?
Yeah. It's certainly worth trying, you
Yeah.
know? So there's a lot of research to show that, for example, the Lancet report from a few years ago, I want to say it was 2024, they did a systematic review of all of the components of brain health. And the
Mhm.
point of it was to determine different factors that play into someone getting dementia. And there are some genetic factors. And when I say genetic, there are some hereditary chromosomes that you can have in your, DNA that tells you you will get dementia for sure no matter what. But the percentage of that being the case is like 1%. It's very, very low. And overall, of all types of all cases of dementia, it's
Right.
very low that it's written in the stars that you will get dementia.
1%.
However, there are some genetic components that say you are at an increased risk. So
Okay.
even just being a woman, women are at an increased risk versus men to get dementia.
Really?
Yeah. Being, unfortunately, being Black puts you
Yeah.
at an increased risk of getting dementia
Yeah.
than other races. There are certain things like that that puts you at an increased risk, but that
Mhm.
doesn't still necessarily say that you will get it.
Right,
And
right.
according to this Lancet report, it looked at all cases of dementia and all the things that could contribute to it, and they determined that 40% of the cases of dementia that we see right now are
Mhm.
preventable if you do certain lifestyle factors, if you change the way that you're living, which
Like
is
what?
really promising.
Yeah? Like what though?
Yeah, so there's like 5 main pillars. The first being staying physically active. So
Right.
physical exercise is really important. It's just keeps your cardiovascular health good. It keeps blood flow to your brain good. Diet. So specifically something called the Mind diet, which is a combination of the DASH diet that we've heard like for heart health and
Mhm.
the Mediterranean diet, which is really heavy on like fish and legumes and green leafy vegetables. It's a combination of those two diets that's research has proven to be really effective in decreasing your risk of dementia.
Okay.
The third is cognitive stimulation.
Mhm.
So that is keeping your brain active. A lot of times as people get older, they might
Start drinking.
retire and then get set into a routine where every day looks the exact same. They're doing the same thing and their brain isn't being challenged. And included in that can also be the fourth is like being connected to other people.
Mm.
So social isolation is a big risk is when you are just staying by yourself. There's higher levels of depression and
Yeah.
you don't have people to support or to stimulate you.
Mm.
And the last is managing health conditions overall. So if you've
Right.
been diagnosed with something else like diabetes or heart disease, keeping that in check and making sure your overall physical health is good is really important. But there are other, I think, I don't remember exactly how many are in the Lancet report, but there's like over
Mhm.
20 factors that they
Okay.
identify, and other things are like preventing or like trying to prevent traumatic brain injuries. So that's
Right.
like wearing a helmet, wearing a seatbelt.
Uh,
Traumatic brain injuries early in life can increase your risk for dementia later.
Right.
Also, not smoking, not drinking alcohol, of course, and then even hearing loss. So if you have hearing loss at some point in your life and you treat it like you get a hearing aid or you get whatever issue is going on, that will improve your chances of preventing dementia. So there's
Wow.
all kinds of things we can do, but they all kind of fit in those categories.
One thing Dementia Darling said yesterday, something about dental health as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
What does that mean
So
by
there's
that?
some research to show that if you have a lot of bacteria in your mouth, if there
Mm.
are untreated dental
Right.
conditions, that can get into your bloodstream and essentially go to your brain. So those kind of infections we see to affect brain health, but we also see it affect heart health. Yeah.
Wow. Okay. Wow. Thanks for that.
Yeah.
That's a lot of information I
A
never
lot of
knew.
information.
A lot of information. So, with dementia, right? What are some do's and don'ts when communicating with someone living with dementia? Because, like I said, this is personal as well because my grandmother has it, and I see sometimes that it's hard for people around her to deal with it.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. Yeah. And I really feel like that's connected to the piece we talked about a little bit earlier is if you can separate the symptoms of this neurological disease they're living with from their personality and their choices and their behavior, we can
Mhm.
start to have more empathy for the human and more frustration could be pointed towards the disease itself. You know what
Mm.
I mean? So if we hear someone asking repetitive questions and we get understandably frustrated, but if we take that frustration out on them and we are confrontational about their symptoms that they, number one, can't control, and typically, number two, they're not even aware of, then that starts to escalate the situation. So I know exactly what you're referring to. When the energy in the room just starts to climb and it starts to build, and it gets to a point where there's no coming back, right?
Yeah.
There's no bringing them back down. It becomes almost explosive at times. And so my recommendation is to try to keep the energy when you're with someone with dementia, to be communicating to them that they are safe. Because typically those situations where emotions start to rise and things start to escalate, it's because they are not feeling safe. And so if we can think like, in this moment, I'm frustrated, I'm angry, they're inconsistent, they're doing all of these things. Yes, all of those can be true, but are we making them feel unsafe? Because when we start to argue, confront, I mean, it would be as if all of a sudden I started saying, "You asked me that question already. Like, we've already talked about that. Stop. Like, what is going on? This whole thing is frustrating. Like, you're doing a terrible job at this." Of course you're going to get defensive because that does not feel true to you.
Yeah.
And you would start to feel unsafe with our relationship in this conversation. And so even though those things might be true, those feelings you have, those frustrations you're experiencing might be true, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're important.
Right.
And so the most important thing is to make them feel safe and loved and be able to let go of the other stuff that
Yeah.
doesn't matter.
She might not be able to explain it, but she's probably feeling grief and depression and everything else. And if somebody around her is screaming at her, probably makes her feel worse that she doesn't know how to say it, right? Is
Mhm.
that I I feel like that's
Absolutely.
happening. Yeah.
Yeah. Because I think a lot of times, like, we can look at someone with dementia and be like, they talk just fine. Like, they
Yeah.
talk a lot, so they don't have problems with communication. But
Mhm.
communication is far more than just speaking.
Yeah.
Communication is understanding the speech of others. It's about reading body language, right? There's so much more to the experience of communication. And so,
Mm.
even though their voice works, that doesn't mean that they have the understanding of the
Yeah.
context of the conversation. They don't have access to any information perhaps that was more than 5 minutes ago. And
Mm.
so when you engage with someone with dementia, we're not playing with the same deck of cards.
Mm.
They have less information than you do. And when we expect them to come into a moment with like equality, that's on us, right?
Yeah.
Like, that's not fair because they're
Yeah.
doing the best they can with the limited understanding of what is happening in this moment.
Right. Right.
And it's a scary place to be.
It is. I saw one of your posts when you're talking about stealing, right?
Mm.
Like, so I thought it was just my grandmother. So I guess they all go through this thinking that you're stealing or somebody's taking their clothes and giving
Mhm.
clothes. So they all go through this little stage.
I won't say all, but a lot of people do. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and that's tied back once again. If we can tie these behaviors, these symptoms we see back to a neurological reason, the neurological reason is there's an area in the brain when someone has short-term memory loss,
Mhm.
that's called the hippocampus.
Mhm.
And this is where we take in information and we hold on to it.
Mhm.
And Alzheimer's disease specifically damages the hippocampus. So they're
Mhm.
taking in information, they're hearing things, they're seeing things. But once it gets to that part of the brain where it's supposed to be held onto, it's not working as well anymore. So it's let go. And so for us, we talk about like normal experiences of forgetfulness. Like, I
Huh?
might have something, I'm holding a hair clip right now. Okay. And I think, oh my goodness, this is so precious to me. This is so important. And I'm going to put this somewhere so I remember it. And so I stick it in a drawer. And I think it's a good idea at the time. And this is, once again, something that's like for neurotypical people, normal minded people. 2 days later, I'm like, where'd I put that hair clip? I
Right.
remember putting it somewhere, and I remember thinking the or like the spot was a good idea, but now
Right.
I can't find it anywhere.
Mhm.
And so I'm searching the house and I'm looking. And then when I finally get to the spot, I open the drawer and I see it, I think, oh, that's right.
Yeah.
That's where I put it. But for someone with dementia
Mhm.
who doesn't even have the memory of ever having it, much
Mhm.
less ever hiding it, when they find it, they think, who did this?
Yeah.
who put this here? Someone else must have taken it from me and put it here. And
Mm,
honestly, that's a reasonable explanation because we would jump to that too. If
true.
we found something somewhere that we didn't put it, we would automatically assume someone else in our household
Yeah.
had it in their possession and put it there. And
Yeah.
so it's really having the perspective that their thought process, someone
Mhm.
with dementia, everything they do makes sense to them, everything they do and think is reasonable to them, then we can stop being so accusatory because they're not working with the same information as us.
So how do you calm a person, like when they get angry, right? Because I know they go through these moments. How does that caregiver calm that situation down when they're screaming at you, saying some words that you've never heard before come out of their mouths, things that you even said, even being sexual, certain things that they do? How do you calm that, or how do you approach them when they're going
Yeah.
through?
Yeah. Well, there's certainly not like a one size fits all answer, but I can give you some examples of things that I've
Okay.
experienced. When someone is behaving in a way that is dangerous, maybe they are physically aggressive
Mhm.
or even just like sexually aggressive, right? Comments or they're making passes that just make you feel really uncomfortable and make you feel at risk, even physically.
Yeah.
It is perfectly okay to set a strong boundary. And so for me, what that looks like is you do not talk to me that way.
Okay.
I am your friend. And then you kind of move on to tell them what to expect next and
Mhm.
have the anticipation that we are going to move on from this and it's not going to happen again. So they say something maybe sexually explicit or inappropriate. They're trying to grab at me.
Mhm.
I am your friend
Mhm.
and you will not talk to me like this.
Right there.
Okay. We are going to drink some coffee together and then we're going to go sit outside. Firm boundaries are okay. Knowing though that they might forget that down the line and we might have to draw that boundary a couple times. But sometimes they're just misinterpreting the situation. So if we stay on the topic of like a sexually inappropriate comment, maybe I am a caregiver that walks into their bedroom as they're waking up in the morning. And because of their experience in life, every time they have woken up in the morning and there's been a female in the room, it's a romantic situation. And so they're
Mhm.
misinterpreting the situation and saying, climb on in here, right?
Right.
If it feels if it feels more like confusion, then I'll just redirect. Hey, oh, actually, my name's Adria. I'm your friend. We don't really talk to each other like that. We're
Mhm.
just going to drink some
So,
coffee and go outside, right? So it can be a little less firm. But if there's an escalation and they are escalating, it feels like aggression. Likely, I want you to think that this is probably fear. And if it
mhm.
is fear, sometimes we need to stop, look them in the eyes and say, hey, 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 you're safe with me.
Yeah.
Okay. You're safe. Everything's okay. And we might need to step out of the room and give them time to kind of reset.
Mhm.
But matching their energy is never going to bring them down. We
Exactly.
have to be the one to initiate that.
How do you help family members who are adults, children, spouses, grandkids to know that don't take it personally? It's not
Mm.
intentional sometimes what they say out of their mouths because sometimes they repeat things and they have their favorites and they say certain things. How do you tell them, don't take it personal? It's not intentional. This is just where she is or he
Yeah.
is at the moment.
Yeah. It's hard because with your experience with that person when they have behaved in certain ways, 20 years ago, it used to be personal, right? Like if they made a comment towards you, it was
Yeah.
personal. And so it's hard to make the switch that the person that's sitting in front of you that looks the same and sounds the same sometimes, that all of a sudden they don't mean it anymore,
Yes.
especially if it's someone who you might have had a history of a testy kind of relationship with.
Yeah.
Um, but I think that's really where it comes into play, where we need to understand what's happening with the brain. So, I do a lot of education on my page and I have a course about like Dementia 101. And we talk about like, if you see this symptom, these changes in personality, here is the part of the brain that is being impacted. Right. And so drawing a straight connection of like, when you hear rude comments, sexually inappropriate comments, or just like impulsive thoughts that you're like, whoa, you should have kept that to yourself. That's happening in the frontal lobe of the brain. It's called our prefrontal cortex. And that's where those processes happen. When we start drawing connections from things that we're seeing to physical parts of their brain that's being damaged, it allows us to have better understanding and more empathy. And so I
Right.
encourage anyone who is struggling with, oh, I'm taking this personally, this hurts, to just pursue a little bit more understanding and education about like the physical aspect of the disease.
Right. Wow. Okay. So in your TEDx talk, right, and your consulting work, you speak about bringing was it dignity and light back into dementia care. What does
Yeah.
that mean?
I for I think for so long, dementia has always held such a stigma, and it certainly still does to some degree. When I think about my great grandmother, looking back, our family realizes, oh, she was living with dementia for probably the last 10 years of her life. But
Okay.
back then, they were saying things like, oh, she's so mean. She's
Yeah.
ornery. She's selfish, like she's crazy. And so, certainly, there was misunderstanding medically about what was going on, but there was also just this stigma attached that as she got older, she just chose to be these things. And I think now, with like the younger generation now, like we are getting so much better about talking about mental health and like
Yeah.
depression and anxiety. And I think along with that, we start having a better understanding that actually the brain can go haywire and cause people's behavior to change.
Yes.
And so I want to apply that same understanding that I think we see in the mental health space
Uh-huh.
to dementia. Because it's very much related. And so taking away that the hushed tones, the like,
Yeah.
oh, Bob has dementia, like that we don't want to talk about it, that they have to live in isolation and secrecy. That's not okay.
It's not a-
Dementia is a medical condition, just like diabetes, just like cancer. We need to speak about it in a matter of fact way and
Right.
not apply all of these preconceived ideas about people just because we've heard that word.
Right. And I think you answered the question I was going to ask, like, what gives you hope about the future of dementia care and awareness? So I think you just answered all of that in that.
Yeah, I
In that.
think these conversations are being had more, and I think there's more people, even on social media talking about dementia. We see it in the news with, recent conversations about Bruce Willis, for example. And so I just feel like it's being talked about in a less scary way,
Okay.
and we're starting to understand the science behind it a little bit more, which is a really important place to start.
Does dementia usually lead to death or it doesn't have to? Can dementia stay in like this beginning stage of I'm just repeating myself over and over and over? Is
Yeah.
there steps to it?
So true dementia is degenerative, which
Uh,
means that it does get worse over time and it
uh,
ultimately can lead to death. Now,
mm,
what that means though in real life is
uh-huh.
that, especially for Alzheimer's disease, for example, people can live for 20 years or more. So
Right.
when someone's diagnosed with dementia, although technically it is like a fatal illness,
Right.
it's not fast. And
Okay.
so for some people it's fast, but for most people it's not.
Uh,
And so, yes, dementia can eventually lead to someone's death, but typically what happens is that a person, especially in the older ages, 80s and 90s, they might pass from another health condition while also still having dementia. So
okay.
most people do not actually specifically die from dementia.
Yeah.
They die from a condition that has made complicated by dementia, if that makes sense.
Understood. Understood. Okay. Thank you. Is there anything else out there that you think people need to know about dementia and even also about caregiving that
Yeah.
you think the audience would love to know?
I think that like there's a great community on social media, regardless of what platform you might have. So if you have Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, there's a community of people who are talking about dementia, that are talking about the realities of caregiving. And so you can find your people there. There are Facebook groups and support groups, but even outside of that, there are so many virtual options
Uh,
for support. So organizations like HFC, which is Hilarity for Charity, run by Seth and Lauren Miller Rogan.
okay.
They have great virtual support groups
Okay.
for anybody to attend from all over the world.
Uh,
If you are someone who is experiencing someone like in your life with dementia who's under the age of 65, so are
mm,
younger people with dementia, there's an organization called Lorenzo's House, which
mm,
supports the families, so the spouses and children of people who are younger.
okay.
Um, And so I think the overarching message is like, you're not alone. I know
Yeah.
in your house day to day, you might be by yourself,
Yeah.
but you're not alone. And just like you said earlier, like, oh, I saw a video about stealing. My grandma, experiences that. So
Right.
other people must do it if you made a video.
Yeah.
And I think that's such a powerful moment because I think a lot of times friends and family think that the thing that they're seeing with the person with dementia in their life that they love, that's so weird. As
Yeah.
soon as they see me make a video about it, they're like, oh my gosh, it's not just us. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so
People that do it. Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
that feeling is really important. And
Yeah.
so you might be by yourself in a house, but that doesn't mean that you're alone in what you're experiencing.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. I appreciate that. Thank you so
Yeah.
much, Adria, for joining us today. I really appreciate this is a lot of information.